650 billion euros. Not over a generation, not over the next 50 years of slow, bureaucratic, committee-approved defense spending. 650 billion euros over 5 years. That is what Germany has committed to spending on its military between now and the end of this decade. For context, that is more than the entire gross domestic product of Sweden, more than the entire annual output of Switzerland, more than most countries on Earth will spend on everything: hospitals, schools, roads, police, welfare, infrastructure, in that same period. And Germany is spending it all on weapons. Think about what that means. This is a country that just a few years ago offered Ukraine military helmets as its contribution to the defense of democracy in Europe. Not missiles, not tanks, not air defenses, helmets. And the mayor of Kyiv laughed. He called it a joke. And he was right. In its place stands something that Europe has not seen in 70 years. A German military machine that is accelerating, not decelerating. A defense budget that rose 32% in a single year. A procurement plan worth 377 billion euros, spanning tanks, jets, submarines, satellites, cruise missiles, and swarms of autonomous drones. A government that rewrote its own constitution to remove the last legal barrier to unlimited military spending. And a chancellor who has stated publicly, without apology, that his goal is to build the strongest conventional army in all of Europe. Vladimir Putin spent years believing that Europe was too divided, too comfortable, and too dependent on America to ever become a serious military threat. He was never more wrong about anything in his life. Stay with us, because this is the story of how Russia lit a fire it cannot put out. How a nation that had spent 80 years atoning for the violence of its past decided that the time for atonement was over. And how the consequences of that decision are going to reshape the balance of power on this continent for the next 100 years. Until now. To understand what is happening in Germany today, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Not to 2022, not to the fall of the Berlin Wall, all the way back to 1945, and to a decision made in the ruins of a shattered country that would echo for 8 decades. Germany has surrendered. The war is over. The Allied powers gather at Potsdam, and they make a choice. Germany will be demilitarized, completely. Its army, the Wehrmacht, is dissolved. Millions of its former soldiers are put to work clearing the destruction they caused, sweeping minefields, rebuilding bombed cities, paying the debt of violence in labor. Its weapons are seized. Its military infrastructure is demolished. The country is divided into 4 occupation zones, administered jointly by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. For a full decade, Germany has no army, no air force, no military capacity of any kind. And then, the Cold War forces a reassessment. By 1955, the strategic calculus has changed. The Soviet Union is expanding its influence across Eastern Europe. Western powers need West Germany, its industrial base, its geography, its manpower, integrated into the NATO alliance. A new military is authorized, the Bundeswehr, carefully designed, carefully limited, carefully supervised. Integrated into NATO from its first day, never sovereign in the way a great power's military is sovereign, always watched. At its Cold War peak, the Bundeswehr fields more than 500,000 soldiers. It is a formidable force, a defensive force, but formidable. And then the wall comes down. 1989, the Soviet Union collapses. The perceived justification for a large, capable German military vanishes overnight. And in its place comes something new. A kind of collective European exhale, a sense that the worst was behind them, that the age of great wars was finished, that peace was a permanent condition rather than a temporary arrangement between conflicts. Military strategists have a name for what follows: strategic atrophy, the slow, invisible erosion of capability that occurs when a country decides, year after year, that security is someone else's problem. Germany did not just experience strategic atrophy, it perfected it. Between 2007 and 2017, Germany spends 1.2% of its gross domestic product on defense. 1.2%, the wealthiest economy in Europe, the most populous nation on the continent, spending 1.2%. Equipment ages, maintenance budgets collapse. Ammunition stockpiles dwindle to the point where simulations of a serious conflict reveal they would be exhausted within days. And then, in 2018, the number that makes the entire world do a double-take. The German Air Force has 128 Eurofighter Typhoon jets, modern, capable aircraft. At any given moment, how many of them are combat-ready? Not 40, not 60, 4. 4 out of 128. The rest are grounded, waiting for parts that have not been ordered, for maintenance that has not been funded, for a political will that has not existed. On the ground, it is the same story. German land forces are operating at 50% readiness. There are not enough rifles to equip every soldier. At training exercises, troops are handed broom handles and told to simulate weapons drills. A military that once attempted to conquer the world, training with broom handles. This is the result of a deliberate, sustained, multi-generational choice. Germany's neighbors, France, Poland, the Baltic states, watched it happen and said little, partly because they were making the same choices themselves, and partly because, if they were honest, a weak German military suited them just fine. The memory of what a strong German military had done to Europe had not faded. Some preferred the broom handles to the alternative. But that is only half the story. There is a concept that runs through the history of European security that military analysts call moral hazard. It describes what happens when one actor takes on all the risk and cost of a shared endeavor, and others respond by reducing their own contributions. America's guarantee of European security was, in its own way, the most expensive act of generosity in the history of international relations. And it produced exactly the behavior that moral hazard predicts. Europe relaxed. Europe spent less. Europe trusted the guarantee. And America, for decades, tolerated it. Until it did not. Because when Russia invades Ukraine in February 2022, and the German army chief stands up and announces to the world that his force is standing there more or less empty-handed, the embarrassment is not just German. It is shared by every country that made the same choices, trusted the same guarantee, and woke up in the same position. The helmets offer, the mayor of Kyiv's laughter, the broom handles. That is what 70 years of moral hazard looks like. Here is where it gets serious, because what happens next is not a modest correction. It is a complete reversal. Within days of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Germany's chancellor at the time, Olaf Scholz, delivers what becomes known as the Zeitenwende speech. Zeitenwende, a German word, it means watershed moment, turning point, the end of one era and the beginning of another. Scholz announces an immediate €100 billion emergency fund for the Bundeswehr. He pledges anti-tank weapons, surface-to-air missiles, and military support for Ukraine. He frames it as Germany's historical responsibility. And the world, accustomed to Germany's decades of hesitation, is genuinely surprised. But even this, even €100 billion announced in the heat of a crisis, turns out to be insufficient. A stopgap. A down payment on a transformation that would require something far more fundamental. That something is a man named Friedrich Merz. Merz becomes German Chancellor in early 2025, and the contrast with what came before is immediate and total. Where Scholz was cautious, Merz is direct. Where Scholz was bound by coalition constraints and political delicacy, Merz moves with the urgency of someone who has looked at the threat assessment and concluded there is no time to waste. His first act is to attack the constitutional framework that had been used for years to limit German defense spending. Germany's basic law, its constitution, contained something called the debt brake, a hard limit on government borrowing, a fiscal straitjacket that had, conveniently, provided every German government since the end of the Cold War with a structural excuse to underfund its military. Merz persuades the outgoing Bundestag to amend it. Defense spending is exempted. The brake is lifted. Germany can now spend whatever it decides is necessary, with no constitutional ceiling. Military analysts describe the vote as a cultural revolution. Observe what it unlocks. Germany announces plans to borrow an additional 400 billion euros over the next 5 years for rearmament alone. Add the regular defense budget, which rises from 86 billion euros in 2025 to 108 billion in 2026. And the total 5-year military commitment reaches 650 billion euros. 650 billion, nearly double what was spent in the previous 5 years. And then, speaking at the Munich Security Conference just weeks into his term, the American Vice President J.D. Vance delivers the speech that removes Europe's last psychological crutch. He is blunt. The United States will no longer serve as the automatic guarantor of European security. Europe must provide for itself. The era of sheltering beneath the American umbrella is over. Merz processes this quickly. He concludes that Europe must pursue operational independence, not dependence on Washington's timetable, Washington's approval, or Washington's willingness to commit troops to a continent that has, in his assessment, failed to take its own security seriously. Germany will lead the response, not with speeches, with steel. But that is only half the story. 377 billion euros. That is the size of the Bundeswehr's published procurement plan. 377 billion euros, spread across hundreds of individual programs covering every domain of modern warfare: land, air, sea, space, and cyber. It is not a shopping list. It is the blueprint for a completely new German military. And it is worth going through it piece by piece because the details matter. Start in the sky. In 2026, Germany retires its aging Tornado jets, aircraft that belonged to a previous generation of aerial warfare, and replaces them with 35 F-35s, the 5th-generation fighter, the most capable combat aircraft in the NATO inventory. These are not merely better planes. They are a different category of weapon. Equipped with stealth technology, advanced sensors, and the ability to carry nuclear weapons as part of NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements, the F-35 allows Germany to play a role in continental nuclear deterrence that it has not been positioned to play in decades. Germany does not just rejoin the first tier of European air power. It redefines what that first tier looks like. But Germany is not stopping at 4th-generation replacements. It is simultaneously leading the development of the Airbus Wingman, an unmanned combat aircraft piloted entirely by artificial intelligence. Designed to fly alongside manned fighters, the Wingman can conduct aerial reconnaissance, jam enemy radar networks, engage opposing aircraft in combat, and strike targets on the ground. Think about what that means in practice. Every German pilot operating an F-35 over contested airspace in the 1930s will be accompanied by one or more autonomous wingmen, multiplying their sensor coverage, their strike capacity, and their survivability. The enemy does not just face a German pilot. The enemy faces a German pilot and a machine that does not feel fear and does not need to come home. On the ground, the scale is even harder to comprehend. Germany currently fields 313 main battle tanks, mostly Leopard 2 variants, the 2A5, the 2A6, the 2A7, capable machines, but aging, and not enough of them. Germany intends to fix this comprehensively. The procurement plan includes up to 1,000 additional Leopard 2 tanks in upgraded configurations, alongside the early development of an entirely new design, the Leopard 3. Development kicked off in early 2025. It is expected to enter production in the early 2030s. Equipped with a new Rheinmetall cannon, the 130mm RH-130, that delivers 50% more kinetic energy at the target than the current main gun, a 50% increase in hitting power in a tank designed to dominate any battlefield it enters. Beyond tanks, Germany is procuring up to 2,500 Boxer armored personnel carriers and up to 1,000 Patria armored vehicles, nearly 700 new Puma infantry fighting vehicles, and thousands of additional support platforms. At full completion, this represents the most comprehensive modernization of German ground forces since the Cold War. 7 new combat brigades formed from scratch, equipped from scratch, trained from scratch, and committed to NATO's eastern defense. Add to this the artillery. The PZH-2000, Germany's self-propelled 155mm howitzer, already proven in combat in Ukraine, is back in full production. Rheinmetall's facility in Kassel is running again. And on top of existing systems, Germany is purchasing 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each capable of striking targets more than 2,000 kilometers away. Do the math. The distance from Berlin to Moscow is approximately 1,600 kilometers. Germany's Tomahawks can reach Moscow from German soil. 400 Tomahawks. The Army Inspector, General Christian Freuding, announces that the first deep strike battery will be operational as early as 2026, mounted on a mobile Typhon system. He goes further. He announces a fundamental change in operational doctrine. Distance capability is a priority in all areas. The old model, superior performance in close-range dueling, is being abandoned. The new doctrine is fire and maneuver. Strike deep. Move constantly. Never present a fixed target to an adversary. Hit the enemy's logistics, command nodes, and supply chains before they can reach you. This is not a defensive posture, and everyone in Moscow knows it. Here is where it gets truly serious. A military is only as strong as the industry behind it. Weapons require ammunition. Ammunition requires factories. Factories require investment, raw materials, and years of sustained production. And for decades, Germany's defense industrial base had been allowed to atrophy alongside its military. Not anymore. Rheinmetall, Germany's defense industrial giant, is at the center of the transformation. The company appears in 53 separate entries in the procurement plan, covering projects worth more than 88 billion euros, with another 56 billion flowing through subsidiaries and joint ventures. Rheinmetall's order backlog already stands at 65 billion euros and is expected to reach 120 billion by mid-next year. Revenue is projected to grow to between 40 and 50 billion euros annually by 2030. To meet the demand, Rheinmetall is building a new munitions factory in Unterlüß, Lower Saxony, inaugurated in the summer of 2025 in the presence of NATO's Secretary General and Germany's Defense Minister, is set to produce 350,000 155mm artillery shells per year by 2027. At full capacity, combined with other sites, Rheinmetall aims for 1.5 million shells annually, making it the leading producer of artillery ammunition in the Western world. From nearly nothing to the biggest in the West in the space of 3 years. And the innovation does not stop at conventional weapons. Germany is procuring several thousand attack drones for the first time in its history. The brigade stationed in Lithuania will be among the first units to receive them, turning what was already a heavy conventional force into something capable of drone warfare at scale. Anti-drone systems are being procured simultaneously: electronic jamming stations, laser defense systems, and the Skyranger 30 anti-aircraft platform specifically designed to defeat swarms of incoming drones. And then there is the program that sounds, frankly, like science fiction. At a startup called Swarm Biotactics, Germany's defense ministry is funding tests using Madagascar hissing cockroaches as miniature battlefield reconnaissance assets. Actual cockroaches. Fitted with technology that can guide their movement and transmit sensor data, they can crawl through rubble, enter underground spaces, navigate pipes, and access environments where no conventional drone or soldier can go. The founder describes them simply. They are super resilient. They can go anywhere. This is the character of modern German military thinking. No idea is too unconventional. No domain is off limits. From Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of reaching Moscow to cockroaches that can crawl under enemy positions, Germany is investing across the full spectrum of what 21st century warfare looks like. Stay with us, because it gets bigger. None of this hardware matters without people to operate it, maintain it, command it, and if necessary, fight with it. And here, Germany faces its most complex challenge. The Bundeswehr currently fields 182,000 active duty personnel. It needs 260,000, not eventually, not in a generation, by 2035. That means Germany must find and train 75,000 to 80,000 additional soldiers in less than a decade, while simultaneously creating a reserve force of 200,000. To achieve this, Germany has passed a new Military Service Modernization Act, a conscription law, effectively, that begins with mandatory medical examinations for all eligible men starting in 2027. Service is initially voluntary, with newly enlisted soldiers paid net monthly wages exceeding €2,000. But the government has been explicit about what comes next if voluntary recruitment falls short. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius puts it plainly. The moment voluntary recruitment is shown to be insufficient, a decision will be made to reintroduce mandatory conscription. Chancellor Merz has been even more direct. He wants a conscription army. The military service law currently passing through Parliament is expected to be strengthened with mandatory elements before it clears the Bundestag. Andre Wüstner, the chairman of the Bundeswehr Association, the organization representing German soldiers, stakes the position without diplomatic softening. There is no time. If voluntary recruitment works, good. Honestly, he does not believe it will. Germany must prepare for mandatory service. And yet, among the recruits who are already showing up, something has changed. At a training base in northwest Germany, a major responsible for basic training describes the difference in the new intake. They know what they are here for. They understand that everything they are training for could one day be real. He does not hope for that, but he is preparing exactly for it. The numbers back him up. In February 2026, 16,100 applications arrived for the Bundeswehr, a 20% increase on the previous year. 5,300 of those applicants formally joined the army, a 14% rise. It is not enough, not nearly enough, but the direction is right, and Germany is putting its growing forces exactly where they need to be. In Lithuania, on the exposed eastern flank of the NATO alliance, the ground over which any Russian conventional attack on the alliance would likely move, Germany has established a permanent heavy brigade. The 45th Armored Brigade, nearly 1,200 troops today, plans for up to 5,000 by the end of 2027. Lithuania is simultaneously building barracks near the Belarusian border capable of housing 4,000 German soldiers, scheduled for completion in 2027. Those barracks are not diplomatic gestures. They are foundations. Germany is not visiting the eastern flank. It is moving in permanently. And from that base, Germany is committing at least €9 billion per year to Ukraine through to 2029. Financial support, military hardware, direct sustenance of a country fighting a war that Germany increasingly understands as its own forward battle. Picture that for a moment. Germany is simultaneously rebuilding its own military from near collapse, funding an active war on Russia's borders, developing next-generation weapons systems, building Europe's largest munitions factory, and drafting a conscription law to double the size of its army, all at the same time, all with the same urgency. For most countries, any one of these tasks would absorb the full capacity of government for years. Germany is doing all of them at once. But that is only half the story. Zoom out, past the procurement contracts and the conscription debates and the munitions factories. Zoom out to the level where history is actually made. Vladimir Putin entered the 2022 invasion with a theory of Europe. The theory was this: Europe was soft. It had grown wealthy and comfortable inside the American security guarantee. It had forgotten how to defend itself. It had forgotten why defense mattered. One sharp blow, and the facade of NATO unity would crack. Germany, the most important economy, the most psychologically constrained by its own history, would hesitate, delay, and ultimately do nothing consequential. The theory was not unreasonable. It was based on evidence. Germany had spent a decade and a half spending 1.2% of its gross domestic product on defense. It had 4 combat-ready Eurofighters out of 128. Its army trained with broom handles. Its general was publicly embarrassed by what his own military had become. The theory was also catastrophically wrong, because Putin's model assumed that European restraint was a permanent condition rather than a temporary one. He did not understand that the restraint was contingent, that it was contingent on the absence of an obvious, escalating, geographically proximate threat. That the moment the threat became undeniable, the moment Russian tanks were rolling through a European country, Russian missiles were striking European cities, and Russian generals were making speeches about further territorial ambitions, the calculus would change. It changed. The cascading consequences are worth dwelling on at length. Germany's defense budget trajectory, from $63 billion in 2025 to $83 billion in 2026 to $152 billion in 2029, funded by a constitutional amendment that removes the ceiling entirely, is not a temporary surge. It is a new, permanent baseline. Once a country builds the industrial capacity, the trained workforce, the procurement infrastructure, and the political consensus for large-scale defense spending, those investments do not simply evaporate when a government changes. Germany has made defense a structural feature of its economy, and the effects spread far beyond Germany. Rheinmetall is now the center of the European defense industrial renaissance. Its artillery shells are feeding NATO stockpiles across the continent. Its armored vehicles are being ordered by Germany, the Netherlands, Lithuania, Italy, Poland, and others. Its order backlog is growing toward 120 billion euros. The company that was once a modest defense contractor is becoming the industrial backbone of NATO's conventional deterrence. Every shell that comes out of Unterlüß, every Boxer that rolls off the production line, every Leopard 2 tank retrofitted to 2A8 standard, all of it rippling through the European defense economy, rebuilding capability that had atrophied for 30 years. France has watched Germany's rearmament with a complex mixture of encouragement and strategic calculation. Paris wants a strong European defense. It also wants that defense to be structured around European technology sovereignty rather than dependence on American platforms like the F-35. The Franco-German relationship, historically the engine of European integration, is being renegotiated in real time, with military power now as central to the equation as economic weight. Poland is procuring at a scale that rivals Germany's. The Baltic states are building fortifications. Finland and Sweden have joined NATO. Conscription has been reintroduced or expanded across Scandinavia. The European defense industrial base is reviving from Finland to Portugal. And Germany, with the largest defense budget on the continent by 2029, is the gravitational center of all of it. Russia's greatest strategic miscalculation was not invading Ukraine. Russia's greatest strategic miscalculation was believing that Europe would let it happen twice. The German beast has been unleashed, and it will not be put back in its cage. If you found value in this, subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next.